Hello, this is a short introduction on the module Christianity in 20th Century Britain, which is part of the Distance Learning MA programme, of course. Now, some of you may have noticed that the other two modules that I've written for the MA have clear themes attached to them. So we've had revivalism and reform, and then we've had the social question. This module doesn't have that sort of clearly articulated theme, so you might be looking at it thinking, well, okay, 20th century, but what's it really going to be about? And I think that's partly because it is actually harder to find a theme that can be explored over the whole course of the 20th century, which was what I was really looking for. The theme that one would most obviously choose, I suppose, if you were looking for a theme, would be that of secularization, which is obviously one of the most heavily written about and discussed topics within discussions of religion in the 20th century. Huge numbers of issues about the timing and the nature of secularization. But I didn't actually want to write a module that was just about secularization, which is what it could easily have turned into. So secularization, I would say, is one of the major issues, and that clearly is there. And if you do the module, you do need to get to grips with some of the debates around secularization. And in fact, one of the textbooks has been written by Callum Brown, who is one of the leading exponents on the notion of secularization as something which doesn't occur until the 1960s. So you will get that sense of the secularization debates feeding through, and particularly into his book that you would be reading if you did this module. But I suppose the second major theme is really the impact of social change on the churches. So it's not so much the social question, which is what I've looked at in the 19th century module, but it's more issues of social change which affect society and which the churches have to respond to in certain ways. So obvious things really, like the changing nature of the role of women in the 20th century, the changing nature of the family as a unit, massively changing social attitudes towards things like illegitimacy and homosexuality that are apparent during the course of the 20th century. And of course also the impact of multiculturalism, because we move obviously from a world at the beginning of the 20th century where religion is taken to mean Christianity or possibly Judaism to, by the end of the century, a massively diverse and complex picture. Now this of course is a module about Christianity in the churches, so I don't explore multiculturalism in huge detail, but obviously it is important to be aware that it is there. And then the third theme, which keeps coming out, keeps reasserting itself through the decades, is ecumenism, that sense of the churches trying to work together more closely as the century unfolds. And so the ups and downs of ecumenism we explore. Beyond that, I'm really looking at it chronologically, sort of decade by decade. So it is, as you would expect, we have a unit on the Edwardian era, 1900 to 1913, which of course also includes, well, it's up to the First World War, so slightly more than the Edwardian era technically. And for that we look at the Edinburgh Missionary Conference, documents relating to that, which is one of the things which kicks off the ecumenical movement. First World War, of course, in the 20th century is obviously punctured by the two world wars. And for the First World War we look at P.T. Forsyth, his text Religion and the Ethic of War. He was a major Congregationalist theologian. By this time he's become more of a conservative figure than he was when he was younger. Then we move on to the churches in the interwar years. G.K. Chesterton, prominent convert to Roman Catholicism, much in the news actually in recent times, and I suppose an attractive Christian writer that people generally find interesting. and then from the interwar period, the Second World War and beyond. I don't spend a great deal of time looking at either, particularly the Second World War, but I am interested in the impact of the Second World War on the on the post-war period, really. So looking into the 1950s. A lot of scholars would say that the real watershed, of course, comes around 1960, and that's true of whatever perspective you're looking at, whether you're looking at that sense of the decline of Christendom that Callum Brown has identified, or whether you're interested in major changes within the churches, such as the Second Vatican Council. So, as you perhaps might guess, my chosen document to look at the 1960s are excerpts from the writings of the Second Vatican Council, the Vatican Council documents. And then the millennium ends, which is the final unit, Unit 6, covering the period 1976 to 1999. And for that, we look at the Faith in the City report commissioned by the Church of England in 1985, at a point when the relationship between the Church of England and the Conservative government of Mrs. Thatcher was at an all-time low. And actually that is an interesting point of contrast for those who are thinking of also doing or have done the module on the 19th century churches and the social question, is actually to see some of the credible parallels which appear in church thinking in the 1980s. And that's really the module in a nutshell. So if you are interested in the 20th century, in very recent religious history, I trust you'll find something of interest in that.